Hi everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction. Welcome to a new episode of the Doctor's Deep Dives. I've been putting a lot of thought into the channel to decide if I want to have any kind of narrow focus on content or topics, as I initially started with just that, specifically intending to look at a small subsection of cartoons from a particular period of time. But things have kind of expanded beyond that, though, and I've come to realize that I honestly feel pretty good about it. I'm very motivated to continue this shift and become a true animation historian, with no limits in regard to format, origin, time, period, or genre. That being said, action cartoons are still my great love in the medium, and the 80s and 90s is my personal ideal moment in time, but I'm officially adopting a no-limits approach to material. That being the case, I'm working on several different projects and types of output, and I'll probably be experimenting over the next several weeks. So I'm just putting this out there and ask you all to provide me whatever feedback and thoughts you may have about any new content that pops up while I decide what kind of style and pace I want to potentially fall into. As usual, your thoughts and ideas are always welcomed and appreciated. Having definitively stated the preceding now, if you love all things animated and animation adjacent, make sure to like and subscribe so I can keep this growing. Now let's jump into this deep dive and see what we can see about 1987's The Comic Strip. The Comic Strip was an anthology series from animation studio Rankin Bass Productions that first aired in syndication on September 7th of 1987. The show consisted of 4 components: Tiger Sharks, Mini Monsters, Karate Cat, and Street Frogs, with each episode comprised of 2 segments from a pair of those series. To quickly summarize each, Tiger Sharks was about a team of spacefaring marine mission specialists who are allies with the planet Watero. Several villains trouble the inhabitants of the waterworld with various schemes, and the Tiger Sharks go from being researchers and engineers to using the power of their fantastical technology called the fish tank to defend Watero as human marine life hybrid superheroes. I'm not going to talk much about the Tiger Sharks in this video because they honestly deserve a deep dive of their own, so just a heads up there. Next up on this series though is the Mini Monsters. This one's about a pair of human twin siblings who unknowingly get sent to a summer camp for monsters, where they spend their summer building relationships with the children of all the Universal classics. The cast of characters in this one is also supplemented by what could potentially be Godzilla's offspring, the daughter of a generic witch of some sort, and the son of Merlin, the magician, not to mention a human-sized talking crow. The series also brought Karate Cat, which takes a mid-century detective story setting and populates it with anthropomorphic cats. The main one of these in the series is a private investigator, and the story follows him and his crew through various cases. When trouble shows up though, as it inevitably does, our main character is ready and able to fight it off as the eponymous Karate Cat. And lastly in the comic strip was the Street Frogs, which is about a group of anthropomorphic, hip-hop loving frogs who sing, rap, and dance their way through everything 80s culture had to offer. I'll admit that I chose this series for the deep dive this week as it was one of the first I saw in the comments on the GoBot video, but I almost backed out when I realized there wasn't a ton of information on it. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to make an interesting video on the topic, but I figured I'd take that as a challenge instead. So I tried digging as deep as I could, and we'll see what y'all think. The series came to us from Rankin Bass Productions, as I said, famous for various stop-motion projects in the late 60s like the classic Rudolph and Frosty Christmas specials. Their filmography actually goes much deeper than that, which we'll have to look at in a future studio retrospective, but they actually had a history of traditional animation and live-action productions going all the way back to 1960. Interestingly, this history is also filled with several co-productions with Japanese studios like Toei and Topcraft, or in the mid-80s Pacific Animation Corporation. Though their animated series output had been sporadic and their shows short-lived since their early success in 1960 and 61, in the mid-80s they were responsible for a trio of hit series, of which the comic strip was the last. Before that had come the Thundercats and the Silverhawks. Of the 3, we know that Thundercats was created by Ted Wolfe, but we don't even know that about the other series. We also don't have any real insight into the creative process on this one. It's obvious by looking at the structure of the 3 shows I just mentioned that the studio found a formula and was sticking to it, and both Silverhawks and Tiger Sharks used a significant amount of both staff and talent from Thundercats. But even nailing down a writer for either series is troublesome, as both latter shows appear to have used a rotating lineup of staff writers. I can't find any discussion, anecdotal or otherwise, about any part of the creation of the comic strip, conceptually or why it was packed in the format and with the selection of shows that it was, other than the standard line about Tiger Sharks being made to capitalize on the success of Thundercats. We kind of therefore have to assume that the creation and production were studio efforts by committee and simply done to capitalize on other successful properties, like Tiger Sharks with Thundercats, Mini Monsters with the previous year's Galaxy High School and its human out-of-their-element storyline, Street Frogs, combining the popularity of anthropomorphic animals with the recent loss of something like Fat Albert, along with the recent success of Gem, and Karate Cat, grasping at something like Danger Mouse, combined with the decade's fascination with martial arts and the legacy popularity of a character like Hong Kong Phooey. Sure, that's me possibly making connections where none exist, but as this was the last series really produced by the studio, it's not impossible that it was a Hail Mary and they were simply throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. Rankin Bass would be absorbed into Laura Martella Pictures in late '87 and kept alive in mostly name only, producing just one animated television special and one animated film between then and the official shuttering of the studio in December of 2000. Following that painfully uninformative and highly speculative dive into the show's history, let's take a look at its production. The way that this show was packaged and sold was unique amongst its peers of the era. The series was produced as 65 regular 30-minute episodes, with each one consisting of 2 10 to 12-minute segments selected from the 4 shows. One note here that Tiger Sharks consisted of full 22-minute episodes, but each was broken into 2 parts so that its segments fit in that format. Various sources of information seem to conflict on exactly how the show was laid out, though, with Wikipedia stating the series aired in 90-minute blocks, while sources like the Big Cartoon Database and TV Tropes listed as being 2 hours. Further clouding the picture is the fact that, as a syndicated series, the stations airing it could also decide to run it as a daily 30-minute series. And that's exactly what some of them did, with some stations airing it as a weekday afternoon series and others airing it as a weekend block. Since it only lasted a single season, going off the air on December 4th of the same year, that means it had 16 weeks of airtime for those 65 episodes. The breakdown on that works out to Tiger Sharks having 26 22-minute long episodes, and Mini Monsters, Street Frogs, and Karate Cat each also having 26 episodes that come in at about 10 to 12 minutes apiece, giving us the cumulative runtime of those 65 regular half-hour episodes. In 2-hour Saturday programming blocks, that would work out to the 16 weeks, or less if it ran as a regular 30-minute episodes on weekdays. All of that means that for all of us who watched it during its initial run, we may have seen it in different ways, at different times, and on different days. I found that to be an interesting tidbit, especially since it means that Tiger Sharks didn't really need to be packaged this way and could have easily ran as an independent Saturday morning series. Anyway, looking at the broader comic strip itself, having gone through the individual credits of each segment and watched the credit rolls from as many episodes as they had here on YouTube, it does look like all of them were, if not written by, then at least had their scripts overseen by Peter Lawrence, who also had several writing credits for episodes of Thundercats and Silverhawks, as well as the 1990 series Peter Pan and the Pirates. But perhaps most interestingly, also had a writing credit for the screenplay of the seminal 80s camp slasher, The Burning. Again, this information is the best I can track down with the resources I have available, and it's interpolated from information across various sources. There's definitely some contradictory or incomplete information out there to be found, so I'm presenting the broadcast consensus here. For producers, the series of course saw Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass as executive producers, but for supervising producer turned to Thundercats and Silverhawks alum Lee Danisher, whose only credits before any of those was as an associate producer on a handful of animated TV movies. Music was composed by a veteran of those series with Bernard Hoffer, who had similarly few credits before or after the trio shows as well. The only names associated with the shows other than Rankin and Bass themselves who really had any lasting history or eventful futures in the animation industry are found in the voice cast, especially with the shared cast across those big 3 that I keep mentioning. As I said though, we'll do an episode specifically on the Tiger Sharks at some point, so let's see what voices the other shows in the series had. Well, unsurprisingly, those shows also use the Thundercats standards, so let's just look at anyone who wasn't one of those. Even this exercise is somewhat difficult, as many actors from the series are only listed as voice and credited with a single episode or 2. Honestly, amongst those even, the only names that stick out are Seth Green, who voiced Sherman, one of the human twins on Mini Monsters, and who Geeks Everywhere recognize from any number of places, Maggie Wheeler, who voiced the witch Jinx, also on Mini Monsters, and some bit characters on Karate Cat, but is probably best known as either Steelheart from Silverhawks or Janice from Friends, and Ron Taylor as Snappy Sam the Turtle from Street Frogs, who was also the voice of Bleeding Gums Murphy on The Simpsons. Honestly, that's about it for this show. When it comes to far-reaching, the comic strip did get airtime in several other countries, including Australia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Jamaica, Italy, and Trinidad and Tobago, as well as a regional broadcast in the Middle East. At least that's what Wikipedia says, though it doesn't cite any references. Did it really air in those countries, or any others? Your guess is as good as mine. Yeah, legacy. If the lack of information in this video wasn't any indication, the series doesn't really have much of one. It had its initial release in syndication, and I saw a couple of passing comments on some repeat airings, but that was at each individual station's discretion. There were a handful of 3-episode VHS tapes from the series released that are long out of circulation, and the Tiger Sharks made a kind of appearance in one episode of the Thundercats 2011 reboot, though that's more like an Easter egg and open to interpretation. Beyond that, nothing. That's a real shame, and also a surprise, as the series is currently owned by Warner Brothers. The fact that there is so little tangible information out there on it, and the series itself is dangerously close to being lost media, are what made me want to do this channel in the first place, as spreading awareness of those shows is the only means I have to help keep them from disappearing. Anyway, I wish this episode had been meatier, but I hope you enjoyed it for what it was. If this is the extent of what I can find on future series, then what are everyone's thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments and we'll see where we go over the next couple of episodes. Like and subscribe so you can watch that as it happens, and so you can catch an alternating video in the next day or two and the 1996 episode of the animated 90s this weekend. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned and stay tuned, as in cartoons. Later.